So I was finally able to get my hands on the new Magic Keyboard Folio for the iPad 10th generation, and I wanted to give you guys my thoughts and also compare that Magic Keyboard Folio to the original Magic Keyboard that works with both the iPad Pro 11 and 12.9 inch and also with iPad Airs. So in this video I want to compare them side by side, let you guys know the pros, the cons, what the Magic Keyboard Folio has over the regular Magic Keyboard and vice versa, because now when you look at the iPad lineup, the type of keyboard that you can buy for that certain iPad could be the determining factor, because think about it. The iPad 10th generation, if you go with the 256GB model, is $600. For $600, you can also get a 64GB M1 iPad Air, and each one of those devices works with a different keyboard, even though the experience of the iPad is relatively identical and the hardware of the iPad is also very similar. So let's go over each aspect of each keyboard and see which one does what and which one does better at certain aspects. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I wanted to start off with the iPads actually closed down, just so you guys can get an awareness of what it looks like. And I'm going to show you guys some B-roll of how thick this new Magic Keyboard Folio with the iPad 10th generation really is. So I used to think that the Magic Keyboard on the iPad Pro side with the iPad installed, and sometimes I would even put a case on the iPad itself, I thought that was thick. But after looking at this new iPad 10th generation, this is actually extremely thick and relatively heavy. And the reasoning is because it does have that new backplate, which is completely separate from the keyboard itself. And the reason that backplate is so thick is because it has to have one layer in order to fully attach to the rear of the keyboard, but then also have another layer on top, which is that new kickstand, which is very Surface-like if you guys are used to that Windows situation with Microsoft. But again, it is a little bit thicker, it is relatively heavy, so if you guys do have an 11-inch iPad Pro with Magic Keyboard, that will be thinner and lighter than this setup right here. So now let me show you what it's like to actually open these up. So if I want to open up this one first, you know, very simple, you open it up, you gotta pull this kickstand out at the same time, and then boom, you're into the iPad itself. And then on the iPad Pro side, you just grab this, pull it up, and then use that second hinge to push it forward. So both of these iPads with their keyboards, I would consider these both two-handed devices. You need both hands to actually get this open, as you guys saw, especially on the iPad 10th gen side, just because, you know, you have the kickstand especially, so you have to open up the kickstand while actually opening up that Magic Keyboard Folio. And now there's so many keyboard cases for the iPads that it's hard to keep track. But again, Magic Keyboard Folio and then regular Magic Keyboard. I am using the 12.9-inch $350 version in the black colorway, but there is an 11-inch version for the iPad Air and the 11-inch iPad Pro that is $300. So just for price point comparison, this is $249 and this is anywhere from $299 to $349. So that's another thing to consider when looking at these keyboards. So the main thing we're going to talk about right now is the actual typing experience, because the typing experience, even though it looks very similar, is a little bit different in how it feels. So first off, from a footprint standpoint, if you guys look at overhead, you can see the Magic Keyboard Folio is actually in a smaller footprint, obviously because the iPad is smaller. But if you compare it to an 11-inch iPad Pro Magic Keyboard, then the footprint is relatively the same. It's kind of compact on the sides. You have full-size keys for the actual letters and numbers, and then the actual auxiliary keys like delete, return, shift, cap locks, tab is actually kind of squished down to make room for this to actually fit on this keyboard itself. But the typing experience is actually great. I really like it. So, hello, how are you doing? And then you have the iPad Pro side, which is also a great experience in my opinion. So the keys travel extremely well, it's very sturdy. But one thing I do want to mention when typing on these is that there's a little bit of a flex on this actual Magic Keyboard Folio. Now it's still very sturdy and it doesn't feel like it would ever break, or even if you try to bend it with your own bare hands, you can't really do that. But I will mention, like I said earlier, that there is a little bit of a flex, very similar to Surface laptops if you guys have ever used those, versus this. There's literally zero flex with this keyboard, which is kind of crazy with how thin and compact this keyboard is. But from a key travel perspective, from actually typing on the keys, they're very similar, very flat surfaces, but good amount of key travel. I can't complain too much when it comes to these. They both give you a good experience. You can hear that they sound a tiny bit different, with the Magic Keyboard being more of a quieter thud, and then the Magic Keyboard Folio being kind of like a brighter and a little bit louder and kind of like a lighter thud. So I would say that the keys feel lighter, for lack of a better term, on the Keyboard Folio, and these just feel a little bit more quality on the Magic Keyboard side. They're just a little tougher to press, but in a good way, if that kind of makes any sense. So now let's talk this trackpad. as you guys can see, even though I'm using a 12.9-inch iPad Pro versus the iPad 10th generation, which is only a 10.9-inch screen, you would think that because the footprint is smaller of the keyboard itself, that the trackpad would actually be bigger on the iPad Pro. But as you can see, the trackpad is actually bigger on the Magic Keyboard Folio. Now, it's not to say that it's a better trackpad itself, because I don't really know what it's quite made out of, but it still has the same idea when it comes to the actual iPad Pro Magic Keyboard trackpad, which is, it is not a dive board design. So you can click on any portion of the actual trackpad itself and still be able to press and touch and interact with it, versus some other keyboards and some other trackpads, from third parties, you normally only can use like the bottom 2/3 and the top part is usually unusable. So that is one thing to consider, that it's both of these trackpads are very, very tactile. Both of them work extremely well. Both of them are very responsive. You can touch anywhere on the trackpad for it to work and for it to recognize everything. But I will say again, there's something about this Magic Keyboard Folio that feels a little bit cheaper. Not in a crazy amount, but I will say that it feels a tiny bit cheaper. I don't know if it's made out of plastic or glass, because I know this one is made out of glass. Just like the trackpads on MacBook Airs and MacBook Pros, this one actually feels like it has a little bit more click travel, which makes it feel a little bit cheaper in my opinion, and it's a little bit louder. So that seems to be a running theme. So everything still feels very sturdy in quality, but this is always a little bit louder, a little bit lighter, and just lacks a little bit of sturdiness in my opinion. And obviously the elephant in the room, you can see that we do have a function row over here. So we have a bunch of keys up here in the function row, and it's exactly what we would want on the Magic Keyboard. So you have your escape key, your brightness up and down, which you can see it's going up and down there. You have this to pull up your multitasking, you have the search to pull up Spotlight, you have the microphone for Siri, you have the ability to turn on Do Not Disturb directly from here, which is awesome to see. You have your play pause and then your forward and back buttons, you have your mute, your volume up, your volume down. And then finally, you have a lock button. If you hold it down, it'll lock the actual iPad itself, which is great to have. And don't get me wrong, I really wish that Apple could put that function key row on the Magic Keyboard. Apple said they didn't put it on there because there wasn't enough room, but clearly there's enough room. Another difference to consider between these two keyboards is that one does have a backlight and one does not have a backlight. So with the Magic Keyboard on the right-hand side, you do have a backlight that you can control via the control center over here. So if I long press on here, I can actually bring it up and down if I want to. Right now it won't let me because there's way too much ambient light outside. So it kind of defers to the ambient light, and it only actually turns on when it's dark enough in the room. And then once it's dark enough in the room, then you can adjust how bright it is. But you can see that over here on the Keyboard Folio, there is no backlight situation whatsoever. So that's something to consider if you do need a backlit keyboard. I'm personally somebody that doesn't really need it all the time, but it is nice to have. And then one of the last things I do want to mention is actual viewing angles. So with the iPad Pro, the viewing angles do get kind of nice, right? Especially when we were coming from the last Slim Folio keyboard case, which only gave you 2 viewing angles. The amount of viewing angles that we have now on the iPad Pro is really, really nice in terms of how far it goes. I believe it goes all the way from, you can hold it at 30 degrees. So if you have it on your chest and you're trying to watch something, you can kind of angle it almost into you. And then you can also obviously angle it backwards. I do believe to about 135 degrees, but I'll double check on that. But you can kind of see that on a desk itself, you do get more viewing angles with the kickstand in terms of on a desk. Clearly, you can't actually go kind of negative on the viewing angle, so you can't have it on your chest and have it kind of face your face. But you can see that you do get a lot of viewing angles, and it does go pretty far for those viewing angles. So I would give the viewing angles probably a leg up for work productivity task to the Magic Keyboard Folio, but for overall, what you need it for on a day-to-day basis, the Magic Keyboard has the correct type of viewing angles, if that makes any sense. Some other things to consider with these two keyboards is that one of them connects with just one piece. So you see the Magic Keyboard is just one Folio keyboard case. You slap it on with the 3-pin connectors on the rear of the iPad Pro or the rear of the iPad Air, and then you actually get 3-pin connectors on the bottom side, on the landscape side of the iPad 10th generation, and it comes in 2 parts. So the keyboard itself connects to the bottom, and then the rear is a completely separate kickstand that connects with magnets on the rear of the iPad 10. And this actually brings up 3 things that we should talk about, which is A, the footprint that the iPad 10 takes up with the Magic Keyboard Folio. So you can take up more space because you need more desk in order to actually use the kickstand and the keyboard itself. Secondly, it pushes the iPad a little bit further away from you. So you can see with the Magic Keyboard, the design was built to bring the iPad closer to your face because Apple thought like, hey, the iPad is a touch-first interface. We want to get it as close to you as possible and not make this feel like a laptop. We want to make it feel a little bit different. Versus on the iPad 10th generation, it feels exactly like a Surface, right? It feels more so like a laptop because it is a little bit farther away, and the hinge is what determines how far away it is, versus the double hinge design of the iPad Pro makes it feel like it's closer to you. And then the last thing I do want to mention is the fact that it is a 2-piece folio case. You can actually remove the keyboard and still use the stand. You can attach the keyboard in reverse and actually flip it to the back side and then lay it down and draw with a pencil. Very similar to the original like origami keyboard case, and also the Folio keyboard case we have with the iPad Pro that you can just flip backwards. So I do like that. That is a pro to me in my opinion, because I don't really like the situation if I need to use the Apple Pencil and lay the iPad Pro down. I have to take the iPad Pro off the keyboard, fold the keyboard down, and then lay the iPad on top of that keyboard. So just some other things to consider. And the very last thing to mention is that obviously you can charge the iPad Pro on the Magic Keyboard with that secondary USB-C plug that's on the actual hinge of the Magic Keyboard, versus the Magic Keyboard Folio doesn't have any charging solution whatsoever like that. So that's going to do it for this video, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and you were able to understand and go through all the differences with me of the Magic Keyboard versus the Magic Keyboard Folio. Like I mentioned, they each have their own pros. Like the Magic Keyboard Folio being detachable and still having the separate stand is actually amazing. I really like that feature. But again, for me personally, the Magic Keyboard that works with the 12.9-inch iPad and the 11-inch iPad Pro, I'm gonna go with that one 9 times out of 10 just because of two main things. Number one has to be the lapability. So lapability is a huge factor for me because I use my iPad literally in so many different aspects and so many different situations. I use it on the couch, I use it on the subway, I use it on the plane. Like there's so many different ways that I use the iPad, and having it being able to be lappable is a big thing for me. And then secondly, it just feels a little sturdier overall because having the keyboard in two parts with the Folio keyboard makes it feel a little bit flimsy, for lack of a better term. And again, to each their own, it's still a very sturdy and very capable device and accessory, but it just feels a little bit more flimsy. And I figured for an extra $50 on the 11-inch and iPad Air version, you can get the Magic Keyboard, which to me just seems like a much more sturdy, quality, and more ease of use and familiar experience than the Magic Keyboard Folio. But that's going to do it for this video. If you guys did enjoy, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so that I know you made it to the end. Check out the wallpapers that are in this video and the link down below because you guys are always asking for the wallpapers. And leave some questions down below also about the iPad 10th generation and any other questions that you have about the Magic Keyboard Folio, because we are working on a full review and a day in the life with the iPad 10th generation, because overall in a silo it is a great iPad, but with all the other iPads in the lineup at the price ranges that they're at, I don't know where this really fits in the lineup. But that's going to do it, everybody. If you guys want to watch some more macOS, iPadOS, or iOS videos, click on one of these videos right here. And until next time, I'm Fernando. Definitely stay subscribed. We're trying to get to 1 million subs here sooner rather than later. But until next time, peace.